300 years ago, in the tall forests of Virginia, beside the quiet flow of the river, stood a plantation house. There, two families landed. Gentry from England were quietly weaving a legacy that would one day reshape the map of the world. And from that legacy came a child we now know as George Washington. But his story began long before he was born. This is that story. America's history is usually told starting from 1776 independence, revolution, war, and the building of a nation. But the true roots were planted long before that. A family, their land, their status, and their choices together shaped a man who would later become the founding figure of the New World. This documentary begins the journey from England to Virginia through landed gentry, plantations, and colonial society where the foundation of George Washington's lineage was formed. Washington family background. The Washingtons in Europe belonged to the landed gentry, wealthy, powerful, socially respected. During the Puritan Revolution and political turmoil in England, many landed families saw their fortunes and opportunities shift. Around 1657, one branch of the Washington family crossed the Atlantic and settled in the English colony of Virginia. So when George Washington was born, his family already stood as a bridge between two worlds, England and England's expanding colonial frontier, Virginia. Why is this lineage important? Because his opportunities, land, wealth, education, and social status were inherited. He did not begin from zero. He began from advantage. Augustine Washington, born 1694 in Westmoreland County, Virginia, son of Capt. Lawrence Washington and Mildred Warner. His father died when he was very young, and Augustine spent part of his childhood in England under the supervision of his mother and stepfather. He later returned to Virginia and inherited the family estate at Bridges Creek. Augustine was not just a tobacco planter. He owned an iron furnace, invested in land speculation, and mined iron ore. In other words, he operated a diversified agricultural and industrial enterprise, not simply a plantation economy. Marriage and children. First marriage to Jane Butler. She died around 1729. On March 6, 1731, Augustine married Mary Ball, age about 23. Their surviving children, George, Betty, Samuel, John Augustine, Charles, and one child who died in infancy. The family moved between estates, including Little Hunting Creek and later Ferry Farm, where George spent most of his early childhood. Augustine died April 12, 1743, at only about 48 or 49 years old. George was just 11. His estates, slaves, and properties were divided among his older children and Mary's children. Mary Ball Washington, born 1708 in Lancaster County, Virginia. Both parents died early, leaving Mary effectively orphaned. Raised under guardianship, she experienced insecurity and hardship. Her guardian George Eskridge handled her legal and financial affairs. Her upbringing instilled deep personal strength, independence, Christian discipline, thrift, hard work, and moral seriousness. Mary married Augustine Washington in 1731. She was 23. Augustine was around 36 to 37. Her marriage brought considerable land as dowry, almost 1,000 acres near the Rappahannock. George Washington, their first child, was born February 22, 1732. When Augustine died in 1743, Mary refused to remarry, a rare choice for colonial widows. She chose independence and took charge of her children and the estate herself. She managed ferry farm, enslaved labor, plantation production, and household affairs. Mary Ball Washington died in August 1789 in Fredericksburg, just months after her son became the first President of the United States. Slavery and plantation reality. Augustine's wealth depended not only on land and agriculture, but also enslaved labor. Mary inherited land and enslaved workers as well. Therefore, George Washington's childhood unfolded inside a plantation system where slavery shaped economics, social power, and everyday life. Washington would later struggle morally with slavery, yet these realities shaped his worldview. Why this matters? 1. Economic foundation. Land, business, mining, and plantation wealth gave George financial stability. 2. Social advantage. Being born into landed gentry provided recognition, respect, and access to influential networks. 3. Personal discipline. Mary's hardships forged strength, self-reliance, duty, and discipline traits deeply reflected in George's character. 4. A realistic view of colonial America. George grew up seeing slavery, hierarchy, and the colonial economy firsthand. 5. Foundation of future greatness. These forces: inheritance, upbringing, social privilege, and the colonial world together shaped the man who would become the father of the nation.